The first thing I don't ever want to do is I'm not here to replace anybody. And I think
Right.
that was part of one of the initial conversations we kind of had was very
Yeah.
much like, look, I'm not trying to take anybody's role here.
Hmm.
Like, and even with the littles, I've never asked them to call me dad. Like, if
Yeah.
that's what you want to do, then but I'm going to be here regardless. I'm going to show up for you in these ways.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Everything's Okay, a mental health podcast brought to you by the one and only Crazy Ant Media. Today is a very special one because it's another edition of Family Sessions. And today we're going to be talking with a member of my family, my stepfather, Levi Hannah. Thank you so much for taking time out of your morning and in this recording and coming to get into the nitty gritty of all the details.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I mean, it's when you started this podcast, I was immediately sort of attached to it just because the idea of sharing things that people aren't always sharing. So when you asked me to do it, I was completely on board for sure.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, you already know that we did the family sessions with mom, your
Yeah.
wife, and
Hmm.
that went over very well. And, I feel like that was able to open up the doors for conversations for a lot of different family members, especially those who are blood related or that close in proximity, I guess you could say, when it comes to, a parental role and a child role. So to be able to have these conversations, I feel like is so important, especially in the family dynamic. Because, I 18 years, well, I mean, if you talk about moving back in more than 18 years
Yeah.
under your roof. So to be able to, have conversations like these with people you are so close with, or at least know you the best, I feel like is so important because, we only have so much time on this earth. So to feel like you have to hold something in is always like a burden, I feel like.
Yeah. Well, I feel like too, so many people leave things unspoken. And
Yeah.
that there's so much, even with all of your personal relationships, there's so much that goes unspoken because, well, should I say this? Should I bring it up? Is it worth the time? This sort
Hmm.
of things. And I think that a lot of people miss out on real connections because of that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, completely agree because yeah, so much time will go by until something is brought up that happened 20 years ago.
yeah. Yeah.
So it's like one of those things. But I do want to start at the very beginning because not a lot of people know, and I'm sure they can tell by the video, there is an age gap, and we get
Yeah.
mistaken for brothers all the time.
Yeah.
So there's what is it, 9 years between you and mom, and then 11 years between you and me.
It's 8 between me and your mom most of the time. Yeah. And then 11
Yeah.
years between us. Yeah.
It's so funny because I
Yeah.
mean, I always think about, especially when I hit this particular age, you were 23 and inheriting three children from three
Yeah.
different dads. So, I mean, that is such a crazy experience. And I mean, something might be a little loose in your head to
Oh,
where you're like,
absolutely.
okay, I
Yeah.
can, I can do this. I can handle this. So, I
Yeah.
mean, talk about that a little bit. What was it like being at such a young age and then entering in a relationship where you obviously love this person,
Yeah.
but you are, you know, bringing on three other different people. Like you have to love this person, but also you have to love these three different people as well.
Yeah, it was interesting to say the least.
Yeah.
Being so young and also being an only child, so not having any experience with brothers or sisters, it's probably helped, quite honestly,
Hmm.
that I was a little naive in that regard, and that your mom was so used to it and at that point had been handling it you guys on her own. So
Yeah.
there was a little bit of I wasn't expected to sort of come in and immediately be good at this. It
Hmm.
was more like how can I help? So a lot, especially early on, I mean the first 3 or 4 years it was me just like drinking from a fire hose trying to figure out how to do all this while I kind of followed her around, like, and figured it out and then added what I could add. And at the time, especially early on, it was mostly just support for her.
Hmm.
It took a long time before I would even say I started sort of a fatherly role, and especially with you, given that you were older than the littles. I just think that so much of my role with you at the beginning was just like, okay, be a support or a friend as opposed to being a father figure in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, because it always seems like, I mean, even my dynamic with them, I feel like has changed. Talking about, between before we moved out to California to where when we came back here, in the Gulf Coast area, I feel like so much had happened,
Yeah.
so much, trauma with their own particular lives, their own particular
Hmm.
dads, situations with y'all. So to be able to and be in different places in our lives and like
Yeah.
you feel like you're replaying certain scenarios, I guess, in a sense, but
Hmm.
sometimes they're more elevated or more subdued than
Yeah.
initial scenarios that you went through with me, I feel like.
Yeah.
So to be able to really navigate that, especially with like you said, and like I have mentioned before, like all three of us children, me and my two siblings, we're all very different people.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's
Completely
very
different.
interesting to see how
Yeah.
like you are able to navigate those things. And I mean,
Yeah.
with being an only child, were you able to, bring experiences from the past where you learned growing up from your dad into this, or how did that go?
Well, I think the biggest thing I learned, and it kind of goes with the title of the podcast, I'd say the biggest thing I got out of my childhood was everything's okay.
Hmm.
Like no matter what happened in our life, I mean, I was a military brat. My dad, moved us around a lot with the military. And then once we kind of settled in Ohio, even when we were there, we moved pretty frequently. You just sort of learn that everything was going to be all right.
Right.
And so there's not that panic when something goes wrong that the whole world's going to fall apart. And I think that's some of what I had from my parents that your mom didn't necessarily have from her side. So that helped a lot because it allowed me to kind of weigh everybody down a little bit. Like, hey, let's
Hmm.
ground this. Like, this is annoying and frustrating, and everybody's like freaking out. But like, okay, well, this is going to be okay. Let's focus on the big things and let some of this stuff go. That was sort of my role with you when you were in your teenage years, because really that's kind of almost flipped now between your mom and I. So with the little, she tends to be a little more laid back about things than she was with you, and I'm the other way. So
Right.
it's interesting how the roles have kind of changed a little bit. But initially, it was always like, look, I've got this part. We're gonna be all right. So yeah,
Yeah, I mean, and that makes so much sense too. It's from when I was growing up because Emily and I have had these conversations multiple times to where, like, I feel like if we're arguing, we're arguing. We're in the trenches, okay? There's no little arguments. We're
yeah,
like,
yeah,
if we're like going at each other, if we're annoyed with each other, like, let's skip a few bases and let's get to third. Like, it's
yeah,
kind of one of those things where, like, especially with growing up, and I know you know this, and obviously from the mother's perspective, but you know this from my dad's perspective as well. They were both very hot-headed. So, I
yeah.
mean, that's how I learned how to argue, and that's
Mhm,
how I learned how to, handle my problems, I guess you could say.
mhm.
So to be able to learn through, different, because I always talk about this too. I learn from other people's experiences.
Yeah,
So to be able to learn through y'all's experiences when you would get into little spats growing up, of course, there were still those blow up
oh
arguments
yeah,
because I mean,
absolutely.
when is there not?
Yeah.
But to learn how to actually have a conversation when you're annoyed with each other
Hmm.
and to be able to add more patience into your day-to-day life to where, you're trying to see how different people approach different things because your way is not the sole way to do
Yeah,
something.
exactly.
So that I feel like that is always very interesting too, because Emily and I talk about all the time how we come from very different upbringings,
Hmm.
to where like, you know, some things that may have been normal to me growing up aren't
Yeah,
necessarily normal to her growing up. So to be able to have those conversations and be able to navigate the different dynamics between, how we approach life is very interesting to say the least. And I'm sure you had
yeah,
that as well with mom because you guys both came from very different backgrounds
yeah.
growing up. So I mean, how did you approach that in a sense?
It was complete. What I'll use the cliche term culture shock, but
Yeah.
yeah, and I'll tell you, like, and I don't know how much you and your mom have had this discussion, but when we first met, I mean, she was budget wise penny pinching and did never had
Yeah.
enough money. I mean, to the point where she'd make a grocery list and we'd go to three different stores to get groceries because we had to
Yeah.
budget it out that tightly. But I
Hmm.
came from a world where that was never a case. Like we didn't have money, but I was never involved in that level.
Yeah.
So this was like completely okay. You know, problem solving like was the biggest piece. Luckily, it's the one thing that I always felt like I'm good at.
Mm.
So I was able to help her go, okay, I don't understand this part, but we can work on these things. And um, I don't know, it's weird. Like it doesn't make any sense. Like when I look back on it now, it's like, oh, how does that kid end up here? How does all this work out? Like it doesn't make sense other than the fact that it just kind of felt right all the way through. It was, there was never any question about it. We just had to figure out how to make it work. So
Yeah, most definitely. And I mean, because you talk about your past self and not even thinking about you would be, in this position where you're at, where I mean,
yeah.
you were kind of used to moving to different states and being able to, navigate that kind of different dynamic in different
Mhm.
cultures. Because I mean, let's admit it, in different parts of the states, it is different
Yeah.
cultures,
Oh, absolutely.
specifically where we came from in the Midwest to down to the Gulf Coast of Southern Mississippi. Like it's completely different. So, I mean, what what do you feel like, because that at that point you guys were a team, you
Yeah.
helped moved everybody down to the Gulf
Hmm.
Coast, and then you even went back up to, continue. It was kind of like the olden days where you went somewhere
Yeah.
and like
Yeah.
provided for the family and sent money back type thing.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, you don't really hear about that anymore.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that really takes a tremendous amount of teamwork
Hmm.
and reliability and support, especially from someone who, and lack of a better terms, and I mean, you're not like this, but I
Yeah.
mean, an outsider to the family, I guess, as someone who stepped into that role as literal step parent.
Yeah.
So to be able to do that with someone who, we both know this, and her and I talked a little bit about it on the podcast, who is not very the most trusting
Oh,
person. She's
yeah.
always like, I got to do this. She's very mama bear, and we love her for
Yeah.
it. But I
Yeah.
mean, talk about that dynamic a little bit in the sense of, the teamwork and trying to just make it after the move.
Yeah. It was one of the things that my parents had talked to me about a lot early on in our relationship
Hmm.
was when they got together, my dad wasn't in the military.
Hmm.
And he was having a hard time finding work. There was all these issues, and they were bickering a lot. And the story goes, I don't know how much of this is like spot on, but the story goes, she told him one day that he needed to go find a job today, and so he went and signed up for the Air Force and came
Mm.
back and said, "This is what I did." And then, like after training and all that, he ends up in England. So but they always talk about how having to move away from their family, their support structure, and all the things made them a better team because they
Hmm.
were isolated and they had to rely on each other. And so when your mom mentioned the move, I was immediately like, you know what, that's probably not a bad idea because at the time, we were still struggling too.
Hmm.
And I felt like a lot of our issues were old patterns we had been in, old people we had been around, family members here, whatever. And so like get away and like go to a place where it had to be a team. It was just us, regardless. Actually helped us grow quite a bit. So it was sort of an ulterior motive in my head. When she brought it up, I was like, you know what? I think this would be good. It was a struggle. Like I remember when because we rented this house and we're still here renting, but
Yeah.
we rented this house sight unseen. And when we came in the first day, I stood in the kitchen for a minute and had like a little panic attack
I'm sure.
because I was like, we had just driven down with everybody in the Durango, dogs, cats, guinea pigs, the whole thing, And we got here and I knew nobody. We knew where nothing was, and like we were in
Right.
this house that doesn't look familiar, and it's like I was immediately like, what the hell did we do? You
Yeah.
know, but then you immediately go, okay, well, what are the options? Like you just make it work. And I think that helps you grow as a person individually, but it also helps your relationships as long as everybody truly is working as a team. So, but yeah, when we first moved down, I went back to Indiana for, I don't know, probably 4 weeks or so
Hmm.
and, finished my job because I didn't tell them we were moving because I knew that they were going to let me go if I did
Yeah.
and I needed the kind of buffer in between. So I went back up there, worked, sent money down, and then ended up coming back down or whatever at that point in time. But yeah, it was interesting. It was difficult. Your mom called me. I don't know. I was gone back in Indiana, I think a day or two,
Hmm.
and Charlie had gotten sick.
Oh
and they were
no.
looking for a pharmacy. It was like 11 o'clock at night, and down here everything's closed.
Everything.
And they were driving to Gulfport to find the only open pharmacy, and she's lost. And this was before you could just pull it up on your phone. You know what I mean? So yeah, it was there was a lot of stressful moments, but your mom handled it so well,
Yeah.
and it just reinvigorated the idea that we really were a team, and she could handle this regardless of what was thrown at her. So
Yeah,
it's
it was
good.
interesting because there was a few events that I feel like happened within that first year, like Charlie broke her arm or something
Yep.
like that. Like,
Yep.
and yeah, I just it's it's wild the dynamic and things that completely like changed the perspective of all of our lives,
Hmm.
because I feel like all three of us, we each take different perspectives, I feel like, to the whole entire move, even though I feel like I I don't know. It's interesting because with me, I love the move, even though at first I was reluctant about it. I even
Yeah.
stayed up there an additional
Hmm.
year basically to finish out high school and to not come down. But then I don't know. It would be very interesting to see where everybody would be at if we'd stayed,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
To see like, I mean, with us running with the same crowds, with us
Hmm.
doing the same things, like if we would have changed into the people we are today, or if we were just to stay the people who we were then,
Yeah.
which would have been crazy.
And it's hard to know. I mean, that's the other
Yeah,
thing too, is I think back because, as one of those people, I just go back and replay all those decisions over and over and over again. But you
right.
can't possibly know what the outcome looks like. All you can do is hope that you handle the next thing the right way. But looking back on that stuff, like I feel like the move was good for us,
Hmm.
but it could have been a negative thing too. Like there,
Yeah,
because everybody's had issues since we've moved as well. It's not like everything's been peachy. So,
yeah,
it is hard to know. And I also think that there's no way to know ahead of time. You can't really even know afterwards how much contributed to this or that. You're just
yeah.
kind of, attributing things here and there, but I don't think you really know. Yeah.
Yeah. And as someone who, I've talked about a lot. I think I've talked about it on this podcast, but I've talked a lot about it with y'all because you knew I was angry about it. But the
Mm-hmm.
whole moving thing and the separation and me staying with my grandmother, which wasn't a problem at all. I mean, to be able to have that support system there to where I was able to finish school was amazing. But I
Yeah.
always approached it as the kid's perspective, the parents leaving the
Mm-hmm.
child. But
Yeah.
I'm now just in this conversation flipping, and I've never asked any of you, either of
Yeah.
you, the
Mm-hmm.
question of what was it like to actually leave a child?
It was really difficult.
Yeah,
My initial thought was I assumed you wouldn't want to come. That
yeah,
was sort of so when we started seriously talking about it, I was like, this is going to be an issue.
yeah,
And, so we talked about what the options would be and those sort of things and laid it out. And we had, talked to your grandmother and said, hey, if this works out this way, can that, so, but I didn't realize until we got here and the separation was real how difficult it was going to be and how
yeah,
difficult it was going to be on your mom. I mean,
yeah,
she was constantly, well, I don't want to bug him too much, but I want to talk to him every day.
yeah.
You know what I mean? And those sort of things. And you still, like you said, you were still in high school, so you're still young. You still
Hmm.
needed things that we weren't necessarily there to provide. But it was also too one of the things that we had an issue with, and I don't say an issue, the one of the things we were concerned about was you taking responsibility for things.
Oh yeah,
And it felt like, so when we gave you the opportunity to come or stay, because we could have just said, look, you're coming,
yeah,
you know what I
exactly.
mean? But this was the first time that you really got to make a big life decision and then reap the consequences of it and kind of figure out what was going on. And it wasn't all bad and it wasn't
It
all
wasn't.
good. There was an in between. And I think that's how life works. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, because I
but
mean, we
yeah,
always battled about, schooling. I mean, I've been very
yeah,
open about it. I was never
yeah,
a school person, and to be, obviously what I'm doing now, I'm a very creative person to be able to put forth all these efforts and to try to make the dream come true,
yeah,
one of those things. But yeah, I mean, I really, yeah, to have that, I felt like was wild, and to be able, but I also feel like there was that period of a year of that school year anyway that I grew a lot
yeah,
as a
mhm,
person to where like even when I came down after high school, you could tell that I was molded into a different person because of that year I stayed up there by myself. Because I mean, yes, she was there to support me financially with food, clothes,
yeah,
anything I
mhm,
needed, a roof over my head, my grandmother. But like she never really tried to parent me. Yes, we got into
Yeah.
like little spats and little arguments or anything, but she never really tried to parent me. So I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know, like I'm kind of indifferent about it because I was still so like in my feelings about the whole moving thing, but then also like I don't know, because I mean, better than anyone that even though the relationship me and mom have now, we would throw down in high
Yeah.
school. Like it
Yeah.
was bad.
It
And it's
was.
so weird to think about now to like where I even talk about stories with Emily or Dustin to where like, yeah, I mean, we were not close. You couldn't
Yeah.
tell now. Like you would
Yeah.
never be able to tell that we were not close at all.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, that was part of it. I mean, it felt like, to me, it felt like your guys' relationship was so strained. And a lot of it was just headbutting on, you were growing up and you've always had a more mature outlook
Hmm.
than most kids your age. So you were acting like you were 19 when you were 16 and those sort of
Yeah.
things. So you kind of felt like you put off by it.
Yeah.
And she was very much she wanted you to be so great that she
Yeah.
wanted to micromanage everything. And so
Yeah.
it's just like there was a lot, you know what I mean? And you guys did butt heads really bad. And again, I think too that it was like, okay, what do you want and how do you
Hmm.
want to make it work? And I think it worked out good. I think, like I said, as much as it was a struggle and it could, there were good and bad parts of it, you did a lot of growing in that time period that I don't think you would have otherwise.
Yeah, completely agree. And I mean, bringing it back to the beginning with being so young to when you inherited us and to be able to, like you said, you were kind of just trying to figure your way out while you were taking the bumps.
Yeah.
At what point did you ever feel like we were your own? At what point did you start to feel like a father figure and not just like a support system?
It's really hard because I don't know that there's a specific point. I think
Yeah.
it's a gradual thing. I
Hmm.
think honestly, I think those like milestones sort of create that. So like it was different with Charlie because I was there when she walked for the first time.
Right.
So it was very much like with her from the very beginning, I kind of felt
Yeah.
like a little more possession.
Yeah.
And possession's a weird word, but
Yeah.
that's sort of how it comes out. Um, and then, but with Sam and you, as you guys grew older and we went through different milestones, it
Hmm.
began to you take some ownership of it. But
Yeah.
I think it's just like it's similar, honestly, to a romantic relationship in that way. Like when you start dating somebody, they're just this person you're dating. And then as you
Hmm.
go through things, as you go through struggles and as you grow, they become a piece of you in a different way. So it really is like with a stepfather relationship, at least from my perspective, it's a development.
Hmm.
It's not, I don't know that the switch flips at any point in time, but it is sort of yeah, as we go along, it kind of becomes that way.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because like I was always wondering that question because, with there being such like a variant age gap, between all of us. I mean, there's like 2 or 3 years between Sam and Charlie, but I mean, obviously 7 and 10 years between myself and them.
Yeah.
So yeah, I feel like, it was always a different dynamic to where like we you and I were kind of wrapped into one to where you took the father role and then was also like a big brother role and to where
Yeah.
we were able to bond about a little bit of everything. But I
Mhm.
know, you're still kind of going through the teenage years right now with the younger
Yeah.
siblings. So I feel like, you're getting a lot of bumps. You're getting a lot of
Yeah.
bob and weaves trying to
Yeah.
maneuver them right now. So as a stepdad now in today's current time, like what practices do you try to still implement back then? And then what practices have you changed from our relationship to their relationship?
Like I said, it's kind of flipped from you to these guys as far as the roles that your mom and I both played.
Yeah.
Um, with you, she was very much the authoritarian still.
Yeah.
Um, and I think because that's how she had to be when you guys were alone, she was
Yeah.
kind of handled all that. But with the younger two, I've kind of been there to be that, so it's allowed her to sort of be the more friend version of a parent.
Right.
And so it really does feel like two kind of different scenarios to me. I think the the one thing that I've noticed, the one thing that I struggle with still, and the one thing that I've noticed that was different is there was never any with you. It was never my responsibility. It never felt like my responsibility to make sure you were doing the right thing.
Right.
That was always sort of her role.
Hmm.
And so it allowed me to sort of just talk to you.
Right.
Even no matter what we were dealing with, even if you were in trouble, or even if I had to draw a line in the sand somewhere, we could still just kind of talk about it. Whereas with these guys, they're, like I said, it's flipped a little bit.
Hmm.
So I've had to be learn to say no and to set my standards, but also try to still have those conversations, which can be difficult. So it's
Hmm.
funny because I've learned where you and your mom butted heads early, and I thought it was silly.
Hmm.
Like I just seen so much of that, and now I'm stuck in that.
Yeah.
So, but really, like as far as like how to make it work, it really is just showing up every day. Like it's just like
Yeah.
anything else. The hardest part is being present.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? Not letting things hurt you, being in the moment, kind of not letting something that happened yesterday affect today. I mean, it's really the same formula as anything you encounter in life, I think. I don't think there's a magic trick to it because honestly, I feel like with parenting too, there is no right answer.
Right.
Every kid's going to be different. What might be good for one kid, it may not be for another. And there's no way to know that. So you just
Yeah.
try to keep them in the lines. The way I describe it to people at work sometimes is I feel like we're at a bowling alley and we're those bumpers. You know,
Mm.
you get those inflatable bumpers in there. So like
Hmm.
our job is to kind of keep you from going crazy, but in
Right.
the middle, there's not a whole lot of, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I think trying, but like I said, showing up is the hardest part, I think, but it's like that with everything.
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel like, because, there's even times like I'm learning it now with being in a very serious relationship and about to get married, like to where,
Yeah.
like, okay, there's certain points where like I should be more present. Like, there's
Mm-hmm.
times where we're just laying and just hanging out, like watching TikTok on both of our
Yeah.
phones, but we're by each other, whatever. But like if say we're at Hobby Lobby and we're looking at like different wedding stuff, I should be present. I should
Yeah.
not be wandering around and that
Yep.
type of thing. So to be able to navigate that, I feel like is very important. And
Mm-hmm.
with the step parent role, you also have to deal with the dads, the
Yeah.
biological fathers. So I mean, they're all so different and they're all so they're all, I don't even know,
Wildly
like
different. Yeah.
the I
There's
mean
no
that could be
common
a
thread.
no, there
Yeah.
that could be a whole show in itself.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, specifically with the younger sister, like there was a lot of trauma that's happened in the past 5 years. So, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, as a step parent, how do you step into that parental role and kind of like, support them while they're having these battles with their biological parent? Because I know it was
Yeah.
very difficult. And like, I was talking about it last night again with Emily that, a lot of things have changed since we moved away 5 years ago and came back.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
A lot of events have happened, and I'm sure I don't know all of them just because, I mean, obviously not being around every single
Yeah.
day and and I know like I'm understanding more now since I've become an adult, but I mean, we forget things, especially the
Yeah.
bad
Oh,
things. We
absolutely.
just want to
Yeah.
push them out.
Yeah. Pretend that didn't happen.
But
Yeah.
so I'm like, I'm sure I don't know stuff that they just forgot to tell me, but that's
Yeah.
okay. It's probably better for my mental health.
Yeah.
Uh,
Sometimes it's better.
but it is. But I mean, as like I said, as a step parent, how do you deal with trauma and all this disillusion that come from the biological parent?
That's difficult in that you have to walk a fine line in between saying
Yeah,
like the first thing I don't ever want to do is I'm not here to replace anybody. And I think
right.
that was part of one of the initial conversations we kind of had was very
Yeah.
much like, look, I'm not trying to take anybody's role here.
Hmm.
Like, and even with the littles, I'd never asked them to call me dad. Like, if
Yeah.
that's what you want to do, then but I'm going to be here regardless. I'm going to show up for you in these ways. I think, and looking back on it, it seems easy to attribute it to this, but I've been reading a lot of Stoic philosophy over the last 10 years or so, and control what you can control is one of the biggest themes that keeps coming up.
Hmm.
And so for me, it was always like, okay, I can't control how their fathers behave. I also
Right.
can't go, murder them when I want to because they're
Right.
idiots. You know what I mean? So it's like,
Yeah.
so you have to figure out what you can do. And a lot of times that's just simply, okay, like here's the pattern. Here
Hmm.
you see this come up over and over again with him. I know he's your dad. I know it hurts. I know it's going to feel that way. But like, you have to learn that this is who this person is. In
Hmm.
the same way that you would learn, like, this is who I am. And hopefully those things are the good things and not bad. I know there's negatives to
Right.
everybody, obviously.
Of course.
But like, you should know, like, once somebody shows you who they are three or
Hmm.
four times, you shouldn't be expecting more than that. And it doesn't mean it's not going to hurt,
Right.
but like, this person is going to drop the ball,
Yeah.
and so it's very much like trying to get them to protect themselves emotionally,
Hmm.
which is hard to do as a kid in general, but especially when it comes to a parent, while also not being the guy who's bashing your father. you
Yeah.
know so it's a fine line. It's difficult to do in the moment, especially because I'm angry.
Right.
We've had some, like I said, we've had some issues. It's very much like, the first thing I want to do is call somebody and yell or drive to
Yeah.
Indiana.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, so it's like I'm angry and she's crying. Like, okay, but none of this helps. So we have to
Yeah.
kind of, yeah, it's difficult. And it, like you said, it puts me in a weird spot a lot of times too, because if somebody comes to me, when the kids comes to me and asks a question, I have to kind of walk around
Yeah.
what I might really feel, to be diplomatic enough to kind of keep this all okay.
Yeah, and it's very interesting too, and I love this about our dynamic and you guys as parents to where like you never badmouth any of our fathers.
Yeah,
I always like you always gave us the room to, and you as in you and mom, were
yeah,
able to give us the room to, evaluate who they were as people
hmm,
before you ever said anything.
yeah,
I always like very admired and very respected that. So to be able to navigate all that. I feel like, is very challenging because you do want to say things. You
yeah,
just want to be like, and be
absolutely.
able to get it out. And
Yeah,
I know you are able to
yeah,
get it out behind closed doors, but still,
exactly.
like in the
Yeah.
moment, you're just like that motherfucker.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. My initial reaction is, why are we still dealing with this loser? You know what I mean? Like,
Literally.
it's
Yeah.
like, and you can't help but feel that way because it's somebody who's hurting somebody that's important to you, regardless
Yeah.
of whether it's a child or anybody else. It's like, when somebody is hurting someone that you're that close to, your initial
Hmm.
reaction is always that.
Always.
Um, and so it's like, okay, can't say that though. So how do I rein
Yeah.
this in, and how do I handle that? Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's a constant battle. I don't think it ever really goes away.
No, it definitely seems not, especially in some sort of certain situations. Definitely
Yeah,
seems not. But then on the
yeah,
flip side of that, you have like on the younger brother side, you have like free reign.
yeah,
The biological father was like, do whatever you got to do.
yeah.
Like, so I
Well,
mean, that's so interesting.
yeah, and the relationships are completely different. Like I said,
Yeah.
like, with your dad, for example, I don't
Yeah.
know that we've ever said more than three
I
sentences to
was
each
just about
other.
to say, I was like, I don't
Yeah,
even know if y'all have ever even
like, I
spoken.
mean, we've hi, bye, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Never anything, but like with Sam's dad, we had conversations, and he's usually like, he tends to be more strict than I would be as natural. So anytime we've
Right.
had any issues, he's 100% on board, and he trusts me, and we've had those conversations. And then, like, with Charlie's dad, it's a completely different relationship. He can't stand the idea of me. So,
Yeah.
so it's like, you've kind of got all three levels of
Uh,
that, and but it is, I mean, it's just navigating relationships, and it's one of the hardest things I think we do as humans in general. um but ultimately it's kind of know your role.
yeah.
Like, the one thing about your mother is, because she's so mama bear, I don't have to protect any of you from
Yeah.
them, because she will do that to bloody murder if needed. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So some of that is taken off my shoulders too, which would make it more difficult. Yeah,
Yeah, most definitely. And I mean, yeah, to be able to navigate all of these different situations because they are roller coasters because sometimes in certain situations things seem better and they have good
yep,
jobs and they take them to Disney World and
yep,
then we go down.
down,
Like
yep,
it's one of those things like you're
yeah,
just like, God damn it. But something interesting too, and I mean, I don't think we've ever talked about this just because we've been dealing and we have as in you dealing with all of our mental health and
mhm,
trying to navigate everybody's but
yeah,
as far as like because I know you have your own mental health things
oh
that you
yeah,
deal with as
mhm,
well. But for us specifically, I don't know if it's our family line or what, but it's the suicidal thoughts.
yeah,
And basically all four of us, including my mother and all the
mhm,
siblings, we have these dark thoughts that, continue to get inside of our head and make us think a different way.
Yeah.
But I am happy enough to say that, I posted that, and I think I said it on the show, but I am a year basically without a suicidal thought. So I think
There
that's
you
pretty
go.
awesome.
Yeah.
But as far as that, because I don't know, and we've never had that conversation either. If you've ever had suicidal thoughts or if you've ever had like different experiences like in your past life before us with people
Mhm.
who dealt with suicide.
Yeah.
Because, literally all four of us have either thought or attempted. So,
Yeah.
I mean, now you're dealing with it hardcore. So, in the
Yeah.
past, have you had to deal with it? I'm sure not to this extent, but ever?
Yeah, and see, it's weird because, like I said, being an only child isolates you a little bit. My parent and having moved around a lot, we were kind of isolated. So looking
Yeah.
back on it, I see mental health issues in my
Hmm.
family, but I was never close to it.
Right.
And with my parents, like I can see some things in them too, but
Hmm.
they always kept me very sheltered from anything that was like that. So I had
Yeah.
no idea anything they were ever dealing with. They were always, behind closed doors in that regard.
Yeah.
So, um, it's weird though because I grew up a very anxious kid, and I was
Hmm.
anxious from anytime I can remember. Like all my big core memories are me having anxiety.
Yeah.
So I was used to that side of it more than say a depression side.
Hmm.
And when I met your mom, and we started spending a lot of time together, it became really clear that okay, this is a different animal
Yeah.
in that regard. Um, and it's difficult to navigate something that you don't have a personal experience with. Like I think we
Right.
all get sad. I think on some level, I think I always call that depression a spectrum. I think
Yeah.
people get to their worst
Hmm.
point sometimes. So I think we all have some level of experience with it, but the consistent, like if I'm not doing the work, this will come back every day
Yeah.
kind of thing was new to me in that regard.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it was a learning curve, and it was a learning curve with your mother very early on. And it was even more difficult to see you guys go through it,
Hmm.
because your initial reaction is, okay, what did I do? You
Yeah.
know, like I think this is normal for most people, but it's like you go back, okay, did I cause this? Am I any part of this? Like, did something I do make this worse? Is there any way I can make it better? And a lot of
Right.
times there's just not, other than being the support. So, um, yeah, I was not prepared. And I even went, like I said, I went to school, went to college, got a degree in psychology purely because
Right.
I was so concerned about myself that it was interesting to learn how we all worked.
Hmm.
Um, and even though I had no real desire to do it as a career, it was the one thing that I liked to study.
Right.
And so that helped because I did have an idea when I saw some things. I was like, okay, that's not normal. That's something we need to look at or have taken care of. So I think, especially with the littles, we were more proactive in therapy and those sort of things with
Yeah.
them. Um, but as boys too, you guys are more resistant to that sort of thing too, naturally.
Yeah.
But yeah, but quite honestly, the mental health, culture in general wasn't around when you were younger and you were that,
Exactly.
so
Yeah.
yeah. So I think there's some things in there probably that we could have caught that we didn't as well, early on. But yeah, I think it's a constant battle. I think it's one of those things, just like if you're dealing with your own mental health issues, if you have mental health issues in your relationships, that never goes away. It's
Right.
always one of those things that you're looking for, that you're kind of keeping an eye on. Sometimes it takes, especially with me and your mother, it's like, hey, I don't know whether you've noticed this, but I've
Hmm.
noticed this, kind of bringing
Yeah.
it up without somebody getting defensive. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, hey, I think you haven't really been doing anything you like to do in a couple weeks. Like, all right, is everything
Yeah.
okay? That kind of sort of constant checking in, I don't think ever goes away. But I really think that's all you can do. You offer the support you can. You know,
Yeah.
if somebody wants the help, they really, because especially with mental health, if somebody doesn't want the help, it's useless, right?
Yeah.
Like, so you have to just kind of constantly check in and say, hey, we can do something else if there's something you need to do, is it, things like that. But I don't know that there's an answer to that other than I wasn't prepared.
Yeah.
And you learn as you go, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I mean, I feel like within the past I guess decade. I mean,
Yeah.
you knew about mental health, you knew about
Yeah.
anxiety, you knew about
Hmm.
depression, but they were just kind of throwaway words, right? And that's
Hmm.
all they were, is just words. I feel
Yeah.
really feel like, the pandemic, the lockdowns, like
Hmm.
I feel like that really brought everything to the forefront,
Yeah.
um, as a mass wide,
Hmm.
for the population and for society.
Yeah.
Obviously we've been dealing with it, as far as cases, case
Hmm.
by case, since forever, basically. Um, I remember specifically dealing with one of mom's incidents, and she talked about that on
Yeah.
the podcast. When the incident when we were down here, and
Hmm.
it was started off of a car accident, and then
Hmm.
it triggered her anxiety to where like she didn't want to leave the house. It was hard for her to be around people.
Hmm.
So that it's interesting to try to figure out how to navigate and balance, because I remember when that happened, and like that weekend or a weekend we went to go get donuts, and like she was so freaked out to be in the bakery. I don't know if you remember
I
that.
do remember
And
this exact day. Yeah.
I had to, when we got back in the car, I don't know, I was just like full of, and this is me not understanding what's going on as well, because I'm still like a young adult. I'm 18, 19, 20, what have
Yeah.
you, but I'm like trying to figure out what I'm going through. But I was filled with like anger, sadness, like
Yeah.
anxiety myself, because like what is she doing? What's going on? Like
Yeah.
all of these different things. So to figure out how to navigate that, and especially when, me not understanding, and I understand now with my own journey, but
Yeah.
with talking in third person, talking
Hmm.
about, talking to yourself about your inner self, and
Hmm.
about how to navigate her, and how to navigate your thoughts and different things
Yeah.
like that. So, I mean, that whole experience I felt like was completely different from the time we were in Indiana and that situation happened. Because, I mean, I feel like there were two different types of situations. So,
Yeah.
anxiety and then hardcore depression.
Hmm.
So to navigate that, I felt like was very interesting, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's the anxiety piece to me is scarier because I connect with it so much.
Yeah.
So to see, because I know what that feels like.
Yeah.
So to see her struggle in that way, and for you to see it, that was kind of heartbreaking for me too, because I remember coming in and she's sitting on the bed or on the floor in the bedroom,
Yeah.
and you guys had just gotten back not too long ago or whatever, and she was like really struggling, and to see it through your lens was upsetting,
Hmm.
because like I know what that looks like, and she had similar issues, but
Hmm.
nothing quite as extreme prior to
Yeah.
that. Um, so I kind of knew what I was dealing with, but to see you and to see the like look of, oh God, what is going on kind of thing, and like
Right.
all the emotions that come along with that, that's difficult too. So yeah.
Yeah.
And but it's really just, trying to in the moment just be a support,
Yeah.
because like ultimately with all that mental health stuff, with every mental health item, like the person has to do the work. You can only
Yeah.
do so much. And it's the hardest thing, I think, for guys
Hmm.
especially. I think a lot of times we like that protector role, or that I'm going to come fix your problems, I'm going to, what I mean, we kind of, some of us, not all of us
Yeah.
obviously, but some of us thrive on that. And
Yeah.
so for it to be something that there's nothing you can do, like I just have
Hmm.
to sit here in it with you, like that's hard. And it was hard with her. It's even harder though with the kids.
Yeah.
Like one of the littles has had some serious issues and very similar to that
Yeah.
level of anxiety, and to do it with them is so much harder.
Yeah.
um because it's like, if you feel completely helpless, and
Hmm.
then you go down your own spiral, which isn't fair.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, get out of my own head first, and let's handle, but yeah, it's fighting, mental health in today's world is a little easier because people are aware of it, but I think it's harder in the sense that we you start to realize that this is not somebody who this isn't going to fix, I
Yeah.
guess. Like, what the path looks like for treatment for these things,
Hmm.
like we're talking years of work, You know what I mean? And because of that, it can be more daunting because it's not
Yeah.
just something you didn't just, have a bad week and go crazy. Like we know that this is forever,
Hmm.
and you're going to have to do this work on a regular basis. You're going to have to see these doctors on a regular basis. It's a lot like, you know what I mean? Not a lot like, but it's like similar to like being diabetic, for example.
Yeah.
Like this isn't going away. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? You can do
Maintaining.
all these things to make it better,
Yeah.
but like you're never not going to have to worry about this. So there's a little bit of that weight that comes along with it too, especially when you see it in younger people, because it's like, we're 40 and 50 at this point.
Right.
Like we're getting that age where like, okay, we got, at most 40, 50 years of this left, whatever.
Yeah.
But like ultimately nobody's going to count on us a whole lot more as our lives move on. You know what I mean?
Right.
But to see you guys struggle with it at such a young age, knowing you have so much of your life ahead of you is
Hmm.
difficult to see too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's very interesting to see how we all navigate it because I feel
Yeah.
like it's a double-edged sword to where like now that it is very open and everybody's very honest about it, at least for the majority of the fact, I feel like people let themselves feel all their feelings, which is
Yeah.
good, but I
Which is
also
good.
feel like they bask in their feelings to where
Yeah.
they get comfortable in that. I mean, lack of a better terms, comfortable in
Yeah.
that sort of situation because they're used to it. I mean, that's kind of what I went through as well with, I mean, with a lot of people in my high school, if they were not, you know, comfortable with something or if they were depressed or anything, suicide was the answer. Like I
Yeah.
have so many friends that have committed suicide to
Mhm.
where like that just felt like again, lack of a better terms, a normal thing,
Yeah.
to where like this is how you handle it. But it wasn't until my hospitalization to where I was like, okay, let's not do
Yeah.
this again.
Yeah.
Because I mean, not that that was, I mean, it was kind of a traumatic experience to be
Hmm.
kind of like locked away on 24-hour supervision to
Yeah.
where like people are just watching you the whole time and they
Yeah.
didn't dim the lights all the way. And I'm like,
Yeah.
how the
Yeah.
fuck do I sleep? And like
Hmm.
all of this different stuff to where like, why would I ever want to do this again?
Yeah.
So I mean, that's kind of why that's where
Yeah.
how I talk to myself, like you never want to go through that again. So
Yeah.
let's make sure we do the work to where like, we are able to not get there and not
Yeah.
be in that place. And I
Well,
know, you're in kind of a certain situation too where exercise is very
mhm.
important for you and helps you
Yeah.
along as well. And I mean, that's what I've been figuring out for the
Yeah.
past 6 months. It's been really helping me out.
Yeah, I steal a lot of the sort of cliches from different people, podcast things here and there. But one
Yeah.
of the ones that sticks into my head consistently is if you want to change your body, change your mind. And if you want to
Yeah.
change your mind, change your body.
Mm.
And I think it's because we're so interconnected, people don't realize it. Like you spend a
Yeah.
lot of time, like I had a therapist once, and therapy is one of those things I think everybody should do all the
Oh
time. I
yeah.
think you should start when you're like 9 and not stop, you know, because just having that outlet of somebody who's there for you in that way is good for people. But I had a therapist at one point say, if you're not eating right and working out and willing to show up here and be honest, this is
Hmm.
all a waste of time.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, the show up and be honest part I was expecting, right? Because you
Hmm.
can't have a real conversation if people aren't telling the truth when they look at you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the eating right and working out thing was like, okay, like, and I had always been in okay shape. I never really watched what I ate as a young man. You just eat
Right.
whatever's in front of you all the time. You know what I mean?
All the
So,
time.
but it really is a big difference. And I can tell now, I still don't eat great all the time, but when I'm
Yeah.
eating well, I notice, you know
Hmm.
what I mean? And so you have to kind of, and I think most of it is routine. It
Yeah.
comes back to that double-edged sword. Like I think with mental health, things being like us experiencing these things and talking about them being normal is good,
Hmm.
but not, you can't take that normal to think that this is how you should feel all the time.
All the time. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, but so with the exercise thing, and it's something that, I've on and off my whole life, I've worked out periodically. Most
Hmm.
recently, a little under a year ago, it just clicked for some
Yeah.
reason. And I can tell the difference. Like if I miss, I go every other day typically at this point, but if I miss 2 days in a row, I can tell.
Hmm.
Like, and I think as you get older, I think those things become a little more drastic. The other thing is sleep.
Hmm.
If I don't sleep well for one night, I'm okay. If I don't sleep well for 2 nights, I'm irritable. Like people are not
Yeah.
gonna like me. You know what I mean? So it's like you really have to do that work. And I think teaching kids to do it earlier would help significantly with a lot of the issues we have. Because, as a teenager, you can't wait to stay up till 4 in the morning. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like just having the freedom to do what I want in the middle of the night, is a thing. But it's like you have to say, hey, look, this is going to make you worse tomorrow, you know,
Yeah.
and you don't look at it that way as a kid, but it is something that, I think we need to be teaching. At the very least, you need to be aware if this might be a cause of some of your issues. So,
Yeah, completely agree. Because I have a Mardi Gras ball coming up to where
uh,
like we're doing the ceremony, we're doing the whole ball, but then there's an after party that starts at 1 o'clock in the morning.
yeah,
And I'm
yeah,
like, okay, I'm
yeah.
not, yeah,
And at
it's gonna
that
be
point,
fun. I'm gonna have
yeah,
fun, but I mean,
you'll
at
have
the
a,
same time, I'm like, damn it.
yeah, you'll have a great time, but you better write off the next day.
Oh
You know what
yeah,
I
I
mean?
yeah, I
Yeah,
made sure to like have both of those days off.
yeah, yeah.
Definitely,
Just clear it
definitely.
out. Yeah,
But listen, man, thank you so much for this conversation. I feel like it's very
absolutely.
beneficial. Like I said, in the same vein that, I did the episode with mom,
Hmm.
to be able to talk about these things with family members is so important, to
Yeah,
the point where, like, we always say if we can help somebody one conversation at a time, that's what we're doing it
absolutely.
for. And I feel like we did this today. So, I mean, like I said, thank you so much for your time. And
Yeah, it's been fun.
it's going to be a good one. It's going to be a
Yeah,
good one.
good. Yeah, and like I said, if you have anything else come up and you ever want to sit down and do it again, I'm game. I like these sort of conversations in general. I'm not a small talk person, so
Right.
so I'm completely game. But yeah, I appreciate the opportunity, and I look forward to listening.
Of course, of course. Man, oh man, what a conversation. It's obviously one of those things where you never know, how different people are going to have different conversations. And I felt like it was very important to have these conversations, like I said earlier, because with your family, it's always so hard to open up about things, especially, if you're so close to them, which is weird because you feel like if you're so close with them, you should be able to open up and have these conversations. But obviously, you guys can tell me and my stepdad, Levi, have a great relationship, and so good that he's actually the best man at my wedding. So I'm very excited about this episode coming out. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe on our YouTube channel, Crazy and Media. And of course, be sure to follow us everywhere at Everything's OKP on social media. So be sure to do all the good things. I'm very excited about this, but I hope everybody remembers that everything's okay.